Oh my God, you guys. I need you to sit with me for a moment, because this story is not fast news. This is not social media noise. This is one of those stories that only makes sense when you've lived long enough to recognize patterns. Patterns of power, arrogance, money, and consequence. And for my viewers who are 65 and up, you already know this truth. People don't fall suddenly. They fall slowly, and then all at once. I want to start with something deeply personal, because credibility matters at this stage of the story. Months before the national media touched this, before headlines, before talking heads, before cable news even whispered his name, I said it plainly: Sean Diddy Combs was going to seek a presidential pardon. Not quietly, not hypothetically, but because he knew where this road was heading. And when I said it, people laughed. They mocked. They talked down. They told me I didn't understand the Constitution. They said a president couldn't pardon someone under those circumstances. Some even said I was spreading lies. But let me tell you something my older audience understands better than anyone else. Time is the ultimate fact checker. Eventually, the truth doesn't ask for permission. It shows up anyway. Major outlets later confirmed it. Rolling Stone. Mainstream reporting. Suddenly, what was once impossible became confirmed. And that's when the story took a darker turn. Because it wasn't just that Diddy wanted a pardon. It was how he tried to get it. Now let me explain something clearly, because this part gets misunderstood on purpose. In the United States, you cannot legally buy a pardon. You cannot purchase freedom. But what wealthy, powerful people have always done is pay for access. They hire intermediaries, political professionals who know how to navigate administrations, who know timing, protocol, and influence. That process costs tens of millions of dollars. And here's the part Diddy could not accept. No one can guarantee the outcome. You are paying for the chance, not the result. And according to multiple sources, that was the breaking point. Diddy didn't want to risk losing money. He didn't want uncertainty. He wanted control. That alone tells you everything. Because when someone is innocent, they fight. When someone is desperate, they bargain. And when someone is arrogant, they try to rewrite the rules. Sources told me Diddy didn't want to pay unless a pardon was guaranteed. Let that sink in. Not do the work and we'll see. Not let's try. But if you guarantee it, I'll pay. Anyone who understands law, politics, or even basic common sense knows that's not just unrealistic, it's dangerous. No legitimate professional would ever agree to that. Not because they don't want money, but because selling a guaranteed pardon is illegal. And this is where age and wisdom matter. You see, younger people often think intelligence means cleverness. Older people know intelligence means judgment. Diddy mistook cleverness for power. Now let's talk money, real money. At one point, he was only able to post $50 million in liquid cash for bail, plus collateral tied to family property. And yes, that's a lot of money for most people. But not for someone who built an empire and marketed himself as untouchable. That told me something then, and it tells me something now. Cash flow matters. Liquidity matters. And when the money isn't moving the way it used to, people start making desperate decisions. Add to that the settlements, the legal fees, the civil exposure. And suddenly those tens of millions for political access didn't look so affordable anymore. And instead of adjusting, instead of humbling himself, he did what he has reportedly done his entire career. He tried to lowball the system. That behavior didn't start in politics. It started decades ago, with artists, workers, collaborators, and partners who all tell the same story. Work first, payment later, if ever. And that pattern matters, because patterns don't disappear when the stakes get higher. They get exposed. This wasn't just about a pardon. This was about a lifetime of believing consequences were optional. And that belief, that's what put him exactly where he is today. If there is one thing life teaches you after 65 years on this earth, it's this. People do not change when pressure is applied. They reveal who they have always been. And that's exactly what happened here. To understand why Sean Diddy Combs is sitting where he is today, you have to stop looking at this like a sudden downfall and start looking at it like the final chapter of a very long book. A book filled with control, manipulation, delayed payments, broken promises, and a deep belief that rules were for other people. Never for him. This is not about one decision. This is about a pattern. For decades, stories followed him quietly. Whispers in the industry. Complaints that never quite made it to the surface. People who said they were underpaid, mistreated, dismissed, or ignored. And every time, the same defense appeared. That's just how business is. But here's what older folks know that younger generations are still learning. When everyone around you says the same thing for decades, it's not gossip, it's testimony. Let's talk about money again, because money exposes character faster than almost anything else. Time and time again, reports surfaced that Diddy would negotiate aggressively, demand perfection, extract everything he needed from people, and then suddenly become unavailable when it was time to pay. Contracts stretched, payments delayed, amounts disputed, settlements dragged out until the other side was exhausted. This wasn't strategy. This was control. Because when you control money, you control people. And for a long time it worked. People needed him. They needed the access. They needed the opportunity. They needed the name. And when someone needs you more than you need them, you can mistreat them without consequence. But that balance doesn't last forever. Eventually the power shifts. And when it did, everything unraveled, starting with Cassie. Now I want to be very careful here, because this is not about sensationalism. This is about cause and effect. When Cassie came forward, he didn't respond with accountability. He didn't rush to resolve it. He didn't show humility. Instead, he stalled. He dismissed. He treated it like a bluff. That alone tells you something. Because people who are innocent don't play chicken with allegations that's serious. They address them. And then almost overnight, the moment a federal lawsuit was filed, the tone changed. Within 24 hours, a settlement, reportedly around $20 million, was reached. Let me say that again slowly for the people in the back. Within one day, $20 million was paid. Now if you've lived a full life, you know what that means. You don't hand over that kind of money unless the risk of not paying is far worse. And yet, even after that, there were people who insisted it meant nothing. That it was just business. That it was easier to pay than to fight. But here's the truth. That payment cracked the dam. Because once the first settlement happened, others realized something important. He wasn't untouchable anymore. And that's when the lawsuits multiplied. That's when civil cases started lining up. That's when receipts started surfacing. That's when silence turned into testimony. And all of it ties back to the same flaw, cheapness disguised as intelligence. You see, Diddy believed he was smarter than the system. He believed he could negotiate after the fact. He believed pressure would make people fold. And for years they did. But the law does not operate on fear. And civil court does not care about celebrity. Once you step into that arena, money talks, and patterns speak louder than words. Now take that mindset and place it into the political world. The pardon process is not forgiving to people who think they can outmaneuver it. It is slow, structured, and relationship-driven. It requires patience, humility, and, yes, financial investment with no guarantees. And that's where Diddy short-circuited. He didn't want to pay unless success was guaranteed. He didn't want to risk losing money. He didn't want to accept that he was no longer in control. That's not how power works, and it never has. Here's the harsh truth that age brings clarity to. When you need mercy, leverage is gone. At that point, the only currency that matters is credibility. And credibility cannot be bought at the last minute. Now let's talk about reputation, because this part is crucial for understanding why doors closed instead of opening. By the time he was seeking a pardon, stories were already circulating about unpaid legal teams, delayed staff payments, and internal financial strain. People talk, especially in Washington, especially among professionals who deal in discretion and influence. No one wants to attach themselves to someone who might not pay, or worse, might try to outsmart them later. That's when the calls stop getting returned. That's when meetings don't happen. That's when influence dries up. And instead of recognizing that reality, Diddy doubled down on what had always worked for him before. Personal pressure, informal favors, and shortcuts. Which leads us directly to the moment that sealed his fate. The letter. Instead of going through traditional channels, instead of paying professionals, instead of respecting the process, he tried to bypass it entirely. And that wasn't bold. That wasn't clever. That was desperate. Because when you believe your relationships can replace institutions, you're already losing. And this is where age and wisdom really separate truth from illusion. People who have lived long enough know. Systems outlast individuals. You can bend them for a while. You can work around them temporarily. But eventually they snap back, hard. And when they do, they don't just punish mistakes. They punish arrogance. Diddy didn't lose his freedom because someone came for him. He lost it because he spent a lifetime refusing to respect limits. And in the end, the very habits that made him powerful are the same ones that left him isolated when he needed help the most. There comes a moment in every downfall when one decision, just one, turns a private problem into a public humiliation. A moment where you don't just lose leverage, you lose dignity. For Sean Diddy Combs, that moment was the letter. And for anyone who has lived long enough to understand pride, reputation, and consequences, this part of the story is painful to watch, because it didn't have to happen this way. When news first broke that Donald Trump had acknowledged receiving a letter from Diddy, I remember stopping cold. Not because it was shocking, but because it didn't make sense. At least not on the surface. Because here's the thing. If Diddy had gone through traditional channels, if he had paid seasoned political professionals, that letter would never have been publicly acknowledged. It would have stayed quiet, controlled, managed. That's how influence works. So when Trump casually referenced the letter, even joking about it, something was off. This wasn't a polished operation. This wasn't a serious political maneuver. This was personal. And personal is the last thing you want politics to be when your freedom is on the line. As more details came out, the truth landed like a weight. The letter wasn't delivered by lobbyists. It wasn't delivered by attorneys. It wasn't delivered by anyone with institutional credibility. It was delivered by Mike Tyson. Now pause here. Mike Tyson is a legendary figure, a cultural icon, a man with his own complicated past, his own scars, his own hard-earned wisdom. But he is not a political operator. He is not a negotiator. He is not an intermediary trained to navigate the delicate, dangerous world of presidential clemency. And by Tyson's own admission, he felt deeply uncomfortable carrying that letter. That discomfort matters. Because people with experience, real experience, know when something feels wrong. They know when they're being pulled into someone else's chaos. They know when they're being used as a shortcut. According to public statements, a mutual acquaintance approached Tyson and asked him to deliver the letter during a social visit. Not a formal meeting, not a policy discussion, a social visit. And in that moment, Diddy made his fatal miscalculation. He assumed that proximity equaled influence. He assumed that familiarity equaled leverage. He assumed that personal history could override process. That assumption has destroyed powerful men throughout history. Because institutions do not operate on sentiment. They operate on structure. Here's what older Americans understand better than anyone else. Respect is earned through consistency, not convenience. When you show up only when you need something, people notice. Now imagine this from the other side. A former president receives a letter not through proper channels, but via a celebrity acquaintance during a casual visit. No preparation, no groundwork, no professional framing, just a plea, handwritten or typed, asking for mercy. That doesn't project strength. It projects panic. And worse, it projects disrespect for the process. Instead of appearing remorseful and accountable, it made Diddy look like someone trying to cut the line. Someone who believed the rules didn't apply to him. Someone who thought fame could substitute for humility. And in politics, that is poison. Trump's reaction, acknowledging the letter publicly and making light of it, tells you everything you need to know. The letter didn't move him. It didn't persuade him. It didn't inspire discretion. It became a prop. And once that happened, the door didn't just close, it locked. This is where the story shifts from strategy to tragedy. Because had Diddy handled this differently, had he accepted the cost, the uncertainty, the humility required, the outcome might not have been freedom, but it would have been dignified. Instead, he exposed himself. Now let's talk about why that matters legally. When you bypass established channels, you don't just lose influence, you lose protection. Lobbyists don't just deliver letters. They advise. They warn. They say, don't do that. They tell you when timing is wrong. They keep you from embarrassing yourself. By avoiding them, Diddy lost his guardrails. And that's when arrogance becomes self-destruction. The letter wasn't backed by institutional voices. It wasn't supported by political allies. It wasn't reinforced by respected intermediaries. It stood alone. And in politics, standing alone is the same as standing exposed. Now add this to what was already happening at the time. Civil lawsuits advancing. Public opinion shifting. Allegations stacking. Financial strain becoming visible. This was not the moment for shortcuts. But shortcuts were all he knew. For years, Diddy operated in a world where people needed him more than he needed them. Where pressure worked. Where intimidation worked. Where delay worked. But the presidency is not a record label. The justice system is not an artist contract. And the Constitution does not bend for ego. And that's the hardest lesson here. One that resonates deeply with older viewers. You can spend a lifetime building power and lose it all by misunderstanding when it's gone. By the time that letter was delivered, Diddy's leverage had already evaporated. He just hadn't accepted it yet. And when he finally did, it was too late. That letter didn't save him. It marked the moment the world realized he was desperate. At a certain point in life, every illusion runs out. Money runs out. Power runs out. Favors run out. And what you're left with is not what you owned, but what you did. This is where Sean Diddy Combs now finds himself. Not in a dramatic downfall, not in some cinematic moment of betrayal, but in something far more frightening for someone like him. Quiet accountability. The cameras move on, the noise fades, and the consequences remain. Let's talk about where things stand now, because this is the part many people misunderstand. Yes, there are criminal consequences. Yes, there is incarceration. But for someone like Diddy, the real punishment hasn't even begun yet. It's what comes after. People have noticed something important over the past months. Assets moving, properties changing hands, expensive items quietly sold. A jet gone, holdings restructured, cash gathered. This isn't random. This is preparation. Anyone who has lived through lawsuits, divorces, or major legal battles recognizes this behavior immediately. You don't liquidate unless you're bracing for impact. And the impact coming isn't hypothetical. Civil lawsuits do not disappear just because time passes. They wait. They build. And when they arrive, they don't ask for mercy. They ask for money. Serious cases are moving forward. Claims supported by evidence. Attorneys who don't bluff. These are not people looking for headlines. These are people looking for accountability. And civil court has a lower burden of proof. That's the part many folks don't understand until it's too late. You can survive criminal court and still lose everything in civil court. Now let's talk about parole, because this may be the most misunderstood part of the entire situation. If and when Diddy is released, parole will not feel like freedom. It will feel like a microscope. Every move watched, every dollar tracked, every account disclosed, every transaction scrutinized. No spontaneous decisions. No off-the-grid moments. No indulgences without permission. For someone whose entire identity was built on excess, control, and impulse, that kind of life is not just restrictive. It's suffocating. And here's what older Americans understand better than anyone else. Restrictions break people who never learned restraint. That's why many believe parole, not prison, will be his greatest challenge. One violation, one mistake, one moment of arrogance, and it all comes crashing back. Now let's address the unspoken truth. Many people believe that even after release, Diddy will still seek a pardon, not to erase prison time, but to erase supervision, to eliminate parole, to regain autonomy. And that's why the money matters. A full pardon doesn't just remove a sentence. It restores legal standing. It ends oversight. It closes doors that are currently wide open to scrutiny. But here's the bitter irony. The very money he's now gathering, the money he refused to spend earlier, is being collected too late. Because credibility doesn't regenerate on command. Trust is not a switch you flip when convenient. And political memory is long. The people who matter in these decisions don't forget who tried to cut corners, who disrespected the process, who thought they were smarter than the system. Now let's talk about legacy, because that's what really matters at this stage of life. Diddy once stood as a symbol of success, of ambition, of turning opportunity into empire. For many, especially older Americans, he represented the promise of hard work paying off. That's gone. And it didn't disappear because of one mistake. It disappeared because of a lifetime of choices. Here's the part that's hardest to swallow. No one had to take him down. No rival. No conspiracy. No coordinated effort. He did it himself. By refusing to pay people fairly. By refusing to humble himself. By refusing to respect systems bigger than him. By believing money could replace integrity. And in the end, those beliefs isolated him at the exact moment he needed allies the most. That's the lesson here. The one that resonates deeply with anyone who's lived long enough to see cycles repeat. Arrogance is expensive. Cheapness costs more than generosity ever will. And power without humility always collapses. This isn't a story about celebrity. It's a story about human nature. About what happens when someone confuses control for strength, fear for respect, and cleverness for wisdom. And if there's any silver lining here, it's this. Let this be a reminder, especially for those watching who have raised families, built careers, and lived full lives, that character is not revealed in success. It's revealed when success no longer protects you. In the end, Sean Diddy Combs didn't lose because people came after him. He lost because he never learned the one lesson life eventually teaches us all. You don't get to negotiate with consequences. And that's where this story truly ends.